Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are on the planet. Welcome back to Creation Conversations, where I will do my absolute best not to shut the stream down before we're supposed to. Feeling a lot better than I was last week. It's been a very busy week nonetheless, so I'm not completely refreshed, but this evening we're dealing with the question of worms and germs, and unsurprisingly, it's a topic we've been asked many times about, none more so than started 3 years ago or what it was now. So we've got plenty of stuff to go through. So it should be a really good time. We're joined, of course, with John and Diane, still together in person in Queensland. We've got Craig, we've got Sam. How are we all doing? What's it like where you guys are?
Well, we're well, thank you. And we've been up and down to Gympie a couple of times. So last week we were in another place, so we're moving around. But today we're back in the Creation Research Office, which is good.
And we know where all the phones are. If they go off, we can grab them and kill them quickly. So it is good to be back. And as you can see, we're not robed up totally in woolen clothes. So it's passing the middle of winter, beginning to even up to what we call spring. But to many of you, that's summertime. But anyway, it's nice to be with you. Craig, what have you been up to?
Yeah, well, we've had a lot of rain and very miserable weather. Our dams are really spilling over and pretty cold down here still.
Sam, how about you?
Working hard. I completed a fresh edit of the upcoming Genesis project that I distributed internally. But yeah, it's going to be shaping up to be a really good film. So keep your eyes and ears peeled.
That's great.
Okay, Joe, you'd better tell us what's been keeping you very busy this last week or so with a couple of illustrations.
We'll dive into that and we'll go ministry report as we always do. So let's go through that. As many of you will know, especially if you've tuned in prematurely, cut everything. We've been working on this building here. These are last week, right? Our concept art on our brand new building. It's already getting, response from local people and newspapers and all sorts of stuff. And we had on the Friday and the Saturday helping us shift everything into the new. Yes, we have actually got there. Not only have we managed to get it all days, which was wonderful, big thanks to everybody who showed up to help, we've also been able to start spreading stuff out and organize. Top floor, you can see we've got full of artifacts which we've begun to lay out and sort of spread out and organize. We're talking with people and peers who want to help make a big day of everything. So we've got somewhere in the region of 25,000 fossils and artifacts. So thank you for your help. Thank you for your support, which means we can actually get a database and start sorting and organizing the museum display. That is a huge blessing. And we've also started to get our advertising out because, yes, we've been in the newspapers. In fact, another newspaper has just announced that they're doing a full page spread all about the Creation Research Centre and everything that's going to be as well. And the great thing, of course, is for some reason, which is wonderful, they don't seem to shy away from the fact that Jesus Christ, we're all about the Bible. We're all about the world in 6 days. Just did. So they've really jumped on board, which is wonderful. We're continuing to spread the message. We're still renovations. We're still busy with the setup. So yes, we do need more volunteers. If you want to come and help us, if you want to support us, all this renovation and all this work does indeed cost money. So we do all of your help. But yes, the Creation Research Centre is coming soon to all. We have a great setup going on there at the moment. So that's what pretty busy over the last couple of weeks. The Lord has been wonderfully gracious to us in getting everything. We'd only just started when we did our broadcast last week. We managed to get everything on the 2 days, and we had our Sunday off, and we spent a really work on organising and sorting and spreading out the museum. So really great blessings. So that's what I've been up to. And why don't you give us your ministry update now and your bit of your background?
Well, as Diane said, we've been up to Jurassic Ark at Gympie several times since she flew in from Canberra, and it's looking good for our open day, which is September the 24th. So hint, hint, wink, wink, any of you Aussies who are out there who are not too far away, September the 24th, it's a free day. You'll even see our new Spinosaur and things like that. We've got some fabulous new artwork. And in fact, we've been on the local radio station. As we went and saw them because it's nearly 3 years, since the COVID situation began to emerge and shut things down. And the new manager there is absolutely thrilled to have us back on air, doing regular programs. In fact, Diane, we decided that since I don't really have a great face for TV, my face is great for radio where no one can see me, but we've decided to do some little clips to promote Jurassic Ark. In fact, what did we do one about something flying? What was that about?
It was about bats that had been Botoxed.
Oh, Botox bats, that's right. You see, we have our regular mail outs, and we'll talk more about that later, but they really adapt so well to 2 or 3 minute clips on the radio. So, Diane, it's about Botox, the stuff that you put on corpses, I guess, or on real people to make them look like corpses. In fact, Diane, tell us about Botox bats, just briefly.
Well, this was one of the items that we sent out in our recent newsletter, where some scientists did some experiments to see what how bats fly. And they noticed that bats have really tiny, thin muscles in their wings, but no one's actually worked out what these muscles do. They're very, very taut, thin. And so to work out what something does, quite often one way is to turn it off and see what happens. And so you can do that with Botox. Botox is botulinum toxin, and it temporarily just paralyzes muscles. Now, it was originally developed for genuine medical reasons for people who suffered from bad muscle spasms, but the cosmetic industry did take it over and use it to temporarily paralyze muscles in people's faces so they didn't have wrinkles. And
so it gets rid of bat wrinkles too. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it does if you put it in the right place. But anyway, they put it in the bat's wings, and then they had already trained the bats to fly in a wind tunnel. So they got them to fly after they'd had this treatment. And they found that they really couldn't fly properly. They could barely fly at all in still air, and in flowing air, when they were flying into a headwind, their wings sort of billowed out like a sheet in the wind, and they just didn't have the control that they normally have. So they decided that these muscles were actually really significant, even though they were really tiny and really thin, in keeping the wings from just blowing out and actually tensing the wings. And so their wings are not just like a kite, where you've just got a piece of fabric that's quite passive. And that's always a reminder when you think of, if something is going to evolve from a non-flying animal into a flying animal, all the research previously has been about how their fingers elongate and the skin stretches over. But you've also got this additional feature that's needed to actually control the wing membrane, as well as what has to happen in their brains and in their ears and in their echolocating. So you cannot make a flying animal one step at a time. You've got to have all of these features all together, even down to these tiny little thin muscles in their.
So now you've got it, folks. Don't Botox your bats. They act like drunk, billowing, wing kites, and it just simply doesn't work. They can't even fly in a straight line, can they? The reality is, these are great little clips for doing on radio where they can't see us. They can only hear the humor or the fun or the facts. And then, of course, we lead them to Jurassic Ark, particularly as a promotion. And it's really great. Thank you, Radio Gympie, for coming on board with this. And in fact, we've also been doing one other thing. Because we've got quite a bit of time at Jurassic Ark, or quite a bit of time with Diane here, we've decided to run with something Vision Radio, a Brisbane-based station here, did for us. They released a clip and put it on TikTok, and overnight it was 150,000 hits, right? That's just, wow, there might be something here. So Joe and I have made a decision. We're going to go ahead and try and make short clips for TikTok. Now, I'm not a TikTok fan or man or anything, but in reality, any opportunity is a great opportunity. So, Joe, let's give them a quick look at just one of the attempts we've done. And, of course, we're aiming for shorter and shorter because that's TikTok mentality. But have a look at this little clip to make one single point. Thanks, Joe. Fossil, eh? I got it from the southern mountains of Germany, Jurassic rocks. You see, we have these living in Australia. That's a fossil cycad. This is a living cycad. No change. They've produced their own kind, just like God said they would. This is the creation guy, John Mackay. So we hope you like that. There's going to be a lot more of that sort of thing. So pray for us as we sort of reach out into many of the unreachable zones that don't get much of a Christian message. And of course, they'll be also adapted for longer platforms, Facebook, etc. So, Joe, that's really what we've been up to.
Yeah,
and Craig, you're in the studio tonight.
We're already on TikTok, and we're on a number of views and everything else as well. So continue to go. I mean, go if you're on TikTok, go and follow us. Don't necessarily join TikTok. Us, but if you're there, come and see us content on YouTube and on Facebook, the same stuff that we put on TikTok. I tell you this before the stream, John, but one of your clips which we put up on Facebook had over 2,000 views in the space of 24 hours, which is wonderful. So continue to support, continue to and great stuff. Craig, over to you.
Yeah, well, I don't think I'll be joining TikTok. I'm sorry, guys, but just get my slides up. Is that ready to go there?
Yeah,
okay. So
yes.
last night I went to Sheffield, Tasmania, and spoke to over 100 men. That was a fantastic night. Had a lot of good feedback, and I spoke on as in the days of Noah, just in particularly referring to the 2 Peter 3 passage, and highlighting that there's three main things that passage is talking that scoffers will deny, and that's the second coming of the Lord Jesus, the creation of the world and by water and through water, and the destruction of that world by water. So that was a great night, and good to see 100 men praising the Lord all together in a small country region. Earlier in that day, we at the museum had a church group from Riverbank in Launceston. 24 people came to the museum, really encouraged by a lot of the testimonies we had there, and enjoyed the displays as well as we went through it. And earlier in the week as well at the museum, I had a phone call on one of the days that we were actually shut, of a couple from Queensland that wanted to come through and have a look. And they came through, ended up spending 2 hours with them there. And they believed in creation, they believed in the flood, but one of the problems they had with faith in God, the God of the Bible, was the problem of evil and the problem of sin in the world. And it is an issue perhaps we can cover on this program one day in more detail. But it was a great time of witnessing to them, and hopefully they'll go away and think a bit more about it. Just wanted to show as well a little display that we've made. There's, might be a little bit hard to see, but in the middle there's a fossil bryozoan. And I did mention this last week, but Sam thought it might be a good idea just to show everybody. And we've also found probably a different species, but some modern day bryozoans as well. I've got a bit of a close-up there of these bryozoans, and so it gives you an idea how these things can en masse get dumped together and form those mats of fossils. So just another example, as John had highlighted with his cycad, basically of a living fossil of a bryozoan. It's not a coral, it's not a plant, it's its own phylum. So that's about it for my ministry update. Back to you, Sam. Back to you, Joe.
Great stuff. Thanks, wonderful. Well, it's about time that we sort of dove into our main topic of the evening, I believe, which is, of course, a good God make bad bugs? Why are there things like deadly bacteria and parasites and tapeworms and all this kind of stuff in a creation today, which originally, of course, was very good? At what point did these stop being bad things? And or another way of looking at it would be, how did these bad things fit into a good world? Now, it's said we've been asked to deal with many times. In fact, John, I think you've actually got a couple of DVDs and lectures and productions specifically about this topic, but why do you to kind of introduce the topic and take us from there?
All right, well, I'll just hold up what you were talking about. We actually filmed this one in London one year, worms and germs and other nasty squiggly things, and how do they fit? And Diane and I, over the years, have responded to many of the skeptics, the critics, the antagonists who love to say, well, if your God is so good, if the creation was perfect, it was wonderful, where do bad things fit in it, particularly sickness, ill health, worms, germs, mozzies, the lot? Diane, you're going to take this first section because we interacted with that rather famous television star, David Attenborough, who is actually reaching near the end of his days. So, Diane, take it away from here for this first section.
Yes, that's how this all started. We came across a quote from David Attenborough. He came to Australia quite a while ago and was interviewed about his autobiography by one of the big regional newspapers. And this is what he said. If we can get my slides to... oh, hang on. We have to go to my slides, don't we? Come on. There we go. No. Oh, right. Now let's see if we can go.
That's right. Good.
There we go. Right. This is David Attenborough in 2003, and he was interviewed by the Sydney Morning Herald, which is a big newspaper that's quite widespread in Australia. And he was asked about, well, how do you respond to people who claim that God created all of these wonderful things that you talk about in your TV programs? And this was his response. When creationists talk about God creating every individual species as a separate act, they always instance hummingbirds or orchids and sunflowers and beautiful things. But I tend to think instead of a parasitic worm that is boring through the eye of a boy sitting on a bank in a river in West Africa, a worm that's going to make him blind. And I asked the creationists, are you telling me that the God you believe in, who you say is also an all-merciful God who cares for each one of us individually, are you saying that God created this worm that can live in no other way than in an innocent child's eyeball? Because that doesn't seem to me to coincide with a God who's full of mercy. Well, if that was true, what he was saying, that this worm can live in no other way than in an innocent child's eyeball, that is a serious problem. So let's have a brief look at the disease he's talking about. It's river blindness, or its medical name there, onchocerciasis, which is an infection with a parasitic worm called Onchocerca volvulus. And this is a seriously very nasty disease, and it does cause people to go blind. Before there was an extensive eradication program, very common sight in some of these West African villages was a younger person leading an older person around, like in this picture here, because the older person had gone blind because of years and years of infection with this particular worm. Now, how does this happen? Well, in fact, it comes from fly bites, and people are infected because the parasitic worm is actually carried by these little black flies that live near the rivers, so hence the name river blindness. The worms will actually breed in the water. The flies breed in the rivers as well, and on the riverbanks there. And this particular black fly likes to bite people. And so if the black flies are infected with worms, And this is an electron micrograph of a fly that has been infected by one of these little worms. They're very, very tiny microscopic worms. If that fly bites a person, the little parasites are then transferred into that person right through that wound in their skin, and the worms will actually live in the skin and they will breed. Now that causes all sorts of terrible problems with the skin. So this is not just an eye disease, it's quite a widespread disease. But the thing that makes people go blind is that people are infected by this worm when they're bitten by the black flies, and the worms infect the skin, and they then produce microscopic larvae. Now these are really, really tiny, they are microscopic, and it's the larvae that spread throughout the body. Eventually these do get into the eye and they will cause intense inflammation. That's your own body reacting to them, and that inflammation will kill the worms, but it also damages the eye tissue. So over the years, eventually the infected person does go blind. So this is a seriously horrible disease, and David Attenborough is quite right in saying that this is a very bad thing. But is he right about whether this worm is designed to actually live in eyeballs? Now remember what we said about the disease, how it progresses. So did God make this worm to live in eyes? And the answer is no. The worms die in eyes. So he's not even right in terms of the science. So we can then challenge David Attenborough and say, all right, would this disease occur in the very good world that God made? Because David Attenborough got it wrong about the science, but he also doesn't understand the Bible, and so do a lot of other people don't understand the Bible either. They don't understand the real history of the real world. The world started out very good. It didn't get here by millions of years of death, disease, and struggle. So we can then come back and ask this question: would this disease occur in the original very good world that God made? Well, what did flies eat in the very good world? Well, the Bible actually does tell us, right? Every beast of the earth, now that includes all of the little creepy crawlies, it's not just the big animals, right? And to every bird of the air and everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given, right, note every green herb for food. And it was so. So let's go back to the very good world and think, well, how would that work? God did create these flies, and they do breed close to fast-flowing rivers, which would have been in the environment, and he did create these worms, and they would live and breed in the rivers. The flies would feed from the vegetation. They did not bite people. So people did not get river blindness because the flies didn't bite people. So no problem for the very good world. However, in the fallen world, you do have a problem. The climate changed. The vegetation degenerated, very much so. The worms are still breeding in the river, and the flies become infected with these worms. Then the flies start biting people because they can't find enough nutrition from the vegetation. And once that happens, the flies bite people, introduces the worms into people. The flies will then go and bite other people and spread the worms, and you've got a disease cycle that's set up, and it becomes completely embedded. So we told this story. If we can come back to us actually now.
Yeah, let them do it.
Yes, all right.
Bring Diane back to full screen, Sam.
Yes, can we come back to us?
Yep.
Yes, there we are. Yes. After we did the research and found out about how this disease worked and thought about it, we actually made this DVD here, right? Did a good God make bad bugs? And we made that, if you can see here, if I hold it up know that it's all that clear, but anyway, the copyright notice there is right. We made that in 2004, so that was after David Attenborough had given this interview, and people did challenge us. Look, about what David Attenborough said? How do we answer it? And so we decided, yes, this is worth answering because it's a serious problem that a lot of Christians have. And we made that video, Did a Good God Make Bad Bugs, in 2004. Now, let's go back to the slides. Yes, there we are. So we'll just skip over that blank one. Oh, the other thing we need to say, sorry if we can come back to us, the rest of that story. Right. After we made that video and it was distributed around the world, one of our British colleagues actually personally gave David Attenborough a copy of that video. Now, what happened to it after that, we don't know. But we did everything we could to answer David Attenborough publicly and also privately. So let's go back to the slides now. And we'll go past that blank one. This is David Attenborough again in 2009. And this is an interview with New Scientist. And he was asked this same question again. How do you answer the people who say that God created? And this was his answer. People say, how can you see hummingbirds, roses and orchids and not believe in the Lord's splendor? But if you're going to look at these things, you should look at other things too. Imagine an African boy with a parasitic worm boring into his eye. If you tell me God not only created, but cares about us all, what about that boy? Are you telling me God deliberately created a worm that's going to blind me? I find that intolerable. Well, yes, that would be intolerable if God deliberately created that worm that was going to blind him. But as we answered in our DVD and in numerous slideshows that I've given and John has given since then, we have answered that from a biblical framework, and David Attenborough really is without excuse. Now, we are not doing this just to poke fun at David Attenborough. Again, if we can come back to us. And this is important. We do sometimes try and call these skeptics out and expose them for what they say, where they have been inconsistent, but that is not because we want to put them down. Now, particularly with David Attenborough, he must be getting on. I mean, how old would he be now? He'd be in his 90s, I would imagine, yes. So he doesn't have much longer on this earth. And he has had more opportunities to see the wonderful works of the Lord than anyone in his generation. And he will be held accountable for that. And God doesn't want anyone to perish. We don't want anyone to perish. So it is important to warn people who are saying things like this, because one day they will face judgment, and we don't want him to end up being judged and condemned. But it is up to him. The information is there, and he really is without excuse, and so are all the people who follow him and think that he's speaking some sort of wonderful gospel truth. It's a very sad situation, so please don't think that we're doing this just to catch David Attenborough out and put him down. We're really concerned for his eternal destiny, and the same with all of the people that he might have led astray. We're concerned about their eternal destiny as well. So let's keep going. Remember, this disease was caused by little biting flies. Now, those flies exist in West Africa. The other place where this disease exists is some parts of South America. But let's look at a more widespread pest that we're all familiar with. That is the mosquito. So we'll just skip over that blank slide. If you were to get a list of mosquito-borne diseases, we'd probably need half a dozen slides to list them all, and it would include a whole lot of obscure things that you might not have heard of. Some of them are only found in some countries, but here are some of the common ones that everyone's heard of. Malaria, dengue fever, very big problem in Australia. Yellow fever was a very big problem in South America. They say that the hardest thing about building the Panama Canal, the biggest enemy was actually the mosquito, because so many of the workers died or became ill from yellow fever. Elephantiasis is another parasitic disease rather than a viral or bacterial disease. Ross River virus, another problem in Australia. Zika virus, a more modern one you may have heard of, particularly in South America. And there's a list as long as your arm that mosquitoes carry around. And so people think, well, why on earth did God make mosquitoes? Could they possibly have ever been any good? I mean, all they do is bite people. They don't seem to do anything else. Well, do they only just bite people? Let's think about, just like we had with the black flies in the very good world, were there mosquitoes in the very good world? Well, there must have been, because God created those along with everything else within the 6 days of creation. So when God declared everything very good, the mosquitoes were very good. Is that possible? Well, yes, it is. In the very good world, all insects make plants. And the mosquito has a proboscis, which is very good at penetrating tubular structures and sucking out liquids. So the mosquito proboscis, which is used to bite people in the world we have today, is actually very good for sucking plant juices and nectar. And so mosquitoes do actually feed on plant juices and nectar, and that's what they did in the very good world. And because the plants were also very good, they got plenty of nutrition. However, the world didn't stay very good, and so mosquitoes had to cope in the fallen world just like everything else, or they would die out. And in the fallen world, male mosquitoes still live on plant fluids and nectar all the time. The reason that mosquitoes are a nuisance, it's actually only the female mosquitoes. Now, for energy to fly around, yes, they do feed on plant fluids, so they will drink nectar and suck plant juices. However, they will seek blood when they are about to lay eggs. And the reason for this is that they need something extra in order to lay eggs. They need iron and protein, and blood is actually a very good source of both of those things. And furthermore, human blood is very easily accessible source, because we're not hairy and furry like lots of other living things that have blood. So we're an easy target. And so the mosquitoes will come looking for a good source of iron, and they are equipped with a proboscis that can penetrate human skin. That doesn't mean it was designed to penetrate human skin. It's just that it can. It's good for penetrating plant veins, so it's equally good for penetrating human skin. And sure enough, there is a good source of iron. That's the fallen world. It's not that God designed them to be bad. It's just that they were made for the good world. They are now surviving in the fallen world. So let's go back to our original question. Why did God make mosquitoes? I mean, there'd be many people who would say, if we could eliminate every mosquito from the face of the earth, the world would be a better place. But that's not true. And John actually has a very good illustration here as to why that's not true. It's actually growing in the garden around it, and we've brought some of it in here. So if we can come back to that's the main screen. Thank you. That's the end of my slides. Now we will pick up on that slideshow, so don't shut it down yet, because John has some slides to show to follow on. I didn't press the right button there, did I? This one. We'll get it right eventually.
Okay, now you may notice that I have sunken in the world during that presentation. my chair just subsided, a little bit of continental drift, I think. But in reality, I do have a good illustration. And then we're going to give you perhaps the first chance for questions, or for Sam to say thank you, and then hand over to Craig for some illustrations that don't involve animals being, perpetrators of disease for us. Let me look at that. I just went outside in the dark and picked some beautiful orchids. And I've been, look, thank you, Sam, that's much better. And look, there's purple ones. These are all variants of the same crucifix orchid, hybrids, many of them. I grow about 50 or 60 varieties of these, and we have them in our orchid display at Jurassic Park. They actually look pretty good, don't they, at the moment?
They're looking splendid
Yes.
at the moment. David Attenborough would be very happy with our
He
orchids.
would.
Yes.
We deliberately did that because people love pretty things. But one of the things I've noticed, I've been growing orchids since I was 16 or 15, right? And I've learned a lot. In fact, some of the things that I learned about orchids are not actually in the books. It's quite fascinating. I went out one day to my little second-hand greenhouse. I could only afford a second-hand greenhouse, put it on the back of a truck, ran it home, restitched the edges. And then I went out in the start of summer and I hear ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. I thought orchids don't make noises. So I hunted around, and there inside one of my medium-sized orchids was a tiny little frog. And its back was just under where the pollen is moved, that we normally think of bees and wasps and things like that. But no, the frog was quite able to lean up and actually get pollen. The little polonium, Diane, the orchids, they're in little sacs, and they could be shifted on the back of a frog. Now, I can't remember reading too much about frog pollination, but then the one thing that really intrigued me was that I went out one morning and it had been a wet day, and of course, as the sun came up and the mosquitoes started to emerge, yes, I have a big pond of water down the back. It's a sort of a swampy area. The mosquitoes will emerge any opportunity they can through much of the year. But today, I was actually looking at my orchids, ones like these, that are even sometimes too tiny to actually fit bees in around the area where the polonium would be. But you see, what was interesting is a little mosquito had landed on the front of the orchid, and it was reaching inside. It was actually getting the nectar. You're getting the nectar out of this orchid. And as a result, the polonium would be glued. We even photographed it, didn't we, Diane? It's just amazing to see that mosquitoes can do good things. The male mosquitoes, the female mosquitoes, you better look up how you tell the difference is in their sort of little funny little antlers that you have coming off the head. And you can tell if it's a male, you can tell it's a female. They both visit the orchids. The male and the female both penetrate into the veins, and so they really are well designed to penetrate into veins. They can suck the sap out. But the thing that they did that really amazed me was they actually got the pollen out as well. So if you think that mosquitoes are purely designed by God to get back at women, particularly because of what Eve did in the Garden of Eden, forget it. They actually do really good things. And in a good world, as Diane said, where they did not need to hunt outside the plant kingdom for, well, it's really a hemoglobin substance they're after, isn't it? You would get it in the plants, particularly the ones that had red colorings and things like that in, and they wouldn't need to actually bite you. Oh, but here in Australia, think carefully, we get a wet season. We've had 4 of them so far this year. We had an awful lot of wet, and after every wet, mosquitoes breed in the water. They go crazy, and then they hatch out, and then you'll find there's millions of mosquitoes for every one plant that provide them with, the hemoglobin compound. So they have to go looking for something else. There's an imbalance in the environment, and the mosquitoes find you. Oh, they find you by 2 things. They can smell hemoglobin, and they have a brilliant infrared sensory system, so that when you're actually in bed, they can fly into your room, and coming off you is lovely, nice heat fumes. And the mosquito hones in on that, and he knows where you're. Well, he just bites it, or she does really, and he. But in reality, it's the woman who bites you, not the woman, the female. I've got to get this gender stuff right. The female mosquito that bites you and will spread malaria and things like that. I think it's time, Sam, if you want to have a short thank you and then give us any questions that might have come in, and then after that we'll relaunch Craig.
All right. Okay. So we have a super chat come in from, I believe it was Doki Doki, right at the top here. Yes, of course. Has to be Doki. Super sticker, 2 US buckaroos, pet character doing a shaker sign with his hand
What's
saying,
the shaker sign?
I think it's like that.
Oh, okay. Well, I love these descriptions. They're quite intriguing.
I was looking
But anyway, yes,
forward to my
thank you
cup
very
of
much.
coffee, to be honest with you.
Matt, you need to get on that. Matt. Right, okay. So we've got a question coming in from Doki Doki, who says, right at the top of the show, did God create the tapeworm?
Being an Australian, we've got really good answers for that, because we've discovered one thing about tapeworms. They are for those of you who don't know what tapeworms are, if you actually in the end pull them out, they're made of little segments like the centimeter sections you find on an old fashioned, the old sewing tapes you used to unwrap around your belly or whatever, and they're in little segments, and each of these will have egg capacity and all of that, and they drop out and they spread onto the grass and all sorts of complications. But if there are too many of them in the belly of the sheep or in the belly of the cow, the animal begins to suffer because they're hooked onto the edge of the intestines or the stomach in there, and you begin to suffer blood loss and other complications as well. And in Australia, yes, in farming places, they can be a real issue. Do they do anything good? Well, some interesting research has been happening here, purely at the pragmatic level. We have discovered some fantastic ways of dealing with a tapeworm and other intestinal worms. I'll come back to that just to finish. Don't let me forget that, Don, because it's cutely humorous, not like a shaker sign. I never heard that word before. That really is its name, shaker, right? I like that. But what you'll find is when you have a look at these worms, the CSIRO and some of these other groups have studied how many worms are too many worms. Now, I know you wouldn't like to have a study like that done on your body, but in reality, they've discovered if you don't have any worms, the sheep doesn't do as well as if you have a few more worms. But if you have too many worms, the animal loses on its nutrition. So it suffers if there's no worms. It suffers if there's too many worms. So for all practical purposes, if that's the data you take, it would seem that worms and animals can have a good balance, where the worm itself really helps to clean out the intestinal content, because you do get stuff in there that you'd be better off giving to somebody else and not just exuding at the other end. So it would seem that there is a right balance. And Diane and I have often talked about, and I know Craig's going to talk about it too, what's the balance, the right number of animals, insects, worms, etc., because the tapeworm is well designed to occupy intestinal tracts. It's well designed to actually be in there. It doesn't seem to cope anywhere else. Oh, the funny bit, you see some of our farmers have gotten desperate. All of these pillicides for getting rid of worms, and I don't know what the correct term is, wormicide or something like that. Vermicide, isn't it? That's right. You know what they've discovered? There's a cheap way of controlling the worms in your animal. It's called red cordial. You know, you parents out there, I know that got me into trouble in the USA once, because I didn't know that cordial was their term for high potent alcohol. It's not in Australia. Cordial is a sort of fruit flavoring, and if you feed it to your worms, feed it to your sheep, it actually keeps the worms under control. Not too many, not too few. Interesting what the farmers have found out, that's much cheaper than the high-tech vermicide you can use. But it seems two things are important. Number one, there is design in both the sheep and the worm. Number two, the balance is what matters. There can be too many, there can be too few. At the right number, they actually cope well. Sam, what else have we got in questions at the moment?
Well, speaking of super chats, I'm Matt sliding in to our chat DMs with 4 US buckaroos of a pair character exaggeratingly stretching his arm
There's my
forward to
cup of
offer
coffee.
a cup of coffee. There we go. I love it. Thank you. God bless you, mate. Right. Okie dokie. Okay. I've got an interesting question here from Otanglo Grasso. Why was the animal world included in the fall? And so when God flooded the world, he could have killed just all human beings, as he did with the Pharaoh when he killed all the firstborns.
Okay, anybody else want to have a go at that one? Joe, how about you?
Well, I think it goes back to the point, and obviously John comment on this, but the first thing that springs to my mind is the fact that man was given dominion. In fact, man was given dominion over all, and we get, you have to be careful with what it means. You can abuse stuff, no, but it doesn't mean that you have control over stuff. There's nothing wrong with taming animals. There's nothing wrong with taking control of, plants, cultivating. The first job of man was to tend the garden, right? So man had full dominion over all of creation, whether that be plants or whether that be animals. Sins, there's going to be a consequence on all that man has dominion over, which includes all of the world, including the plants and the animals. And you'll find that part of the specific curse that God gave to the man was that in toil, right? You'll have to farm, right? You still have dominion over the world, but it's not as a, shall we say, complete before, because now the plants and the animals are going to fight. Now you've got to be careful of some of the animals because they might turn around and bite you. Now it's going to be tough to look after the world because there's going to be thorns and thistles. Now as the population and the world changes after Noah's flood, you're going to have erratic climates, which means it's going to be increasingly more difficult to create enough food for everybody. So you're going to need to do intensive farming, which has problems with it. So as a result of this, the world becomes cursed by default, right? Because man is cursed and the world which man has dominion over. In fact, it's that famous verse in Romans which says the whole of the universe groans because of sin, because of mankind's sin. So that's where my thought process is going. Any comments, John?
Yes, I'm reminded of the old Greek fable about the man when he touched anything. I mean, he wanted to be rich beyond compare. So he was granted the desire that anything he touched would turn to gold. And you think, wow, fantastic. But the trouble was when he touched water, it turned to gold. When he touched food, it turned to gold. He ended up with no friends because would you want to be touched by this guy and turn to solid stone? So what he thought was a blessing turned into a curse. He became the only thing on the planet that could survive. And yet in the end, everything he needed to survive was removed from him. Now let's start with God making Adam. God has made Adam in his own image. And as Joseph said correctly, he gave Adam authority over everything. All right, so Adam sins. Now, again, to put that in context, and I know any of you ladies need to seriously think this through, and some of you guys, if you want to exercise godly headship, need to work on this one. It does not say Eve brought sin onto the planet. It says with one man, sin came onto the planet. History, it was Adam that God told the rules to before Eve was there. Keep that firmly in mind. Adam knew what he was doing. Eve was tricked. Adam chose in the knowledge that God would punish him to actually eat of the fruit. Eve was deceived. Okay, and there's lots of consequences of that. One day again, we'll have to be brave enough, Joe, and do our creation of love and marriage and family, etc. Maybe over the whole 12 or 13 segments we've done the original one on, it sort of dropped out of popularity because it is so unpopular to believe that man and woman had such a different history in terms of sin. Adam was there when God made the rules. God told Adam if he ate, he would die. Now let's think that Adam is the only one affected by this rule. Okay, here's Adam. His little world around him has been judged. Question, if you were a bee or a nice, cute dog, and there's Adam, the fallen sinner, in a total fallen environment. Everywhere he went, his fallen environment goes with him. The thorns pop up on the ground straight away. Would you want to go anywhere near Adam? I mean, you're a bird that's making eggs that he would eat. You wouldn't want him to have anything to do with your eggs, because anything he touches is cursed. Adam had the ground cursed. Adam, if he's the only one who's going to be dealt with in the curse, then like the man who turned everything to gold, Adam's life would have been unbelievably miserable, but you would not have wanted anything to do with him, right? You need to understand that completely. When God flooded the world, could he have just killed the humans off? Well, if he did, we wouldn't be having this program. It's as simple as that, right? But you see, you are also told you have the benefit now of both hindsight as well as the foreknowledge God even gave Adam, that there would be a solution to this problem of not only God judging Adam, but of the curse. For those of you who are still tempted to believe in theistic evolution, which I struggle with for many years, if you skip over to the end of the Bible, it talks about there being no more curse. When the real problem is dealt with, when sin is finally done away with, there'll be no more curse. It's not just Adam's sin that's the issue. It's the fact that God cursed the ground, and God warned Adam that this would happen. He'd be cast out of the presence of the tree of life. He would have to die. But in having to die, there was a way of salvation made available, because another Adam came, and another Adam, the last Adam, died, and the step was open to the final removal of the curse. So if you get rid of Noah, there's going to be no Jesus. So you've got to see God's bigger picture than just you and I wanting, oh, the daisies are so pretty, why should they be cursed, right? So that's probably about as far as we need to go on that one. But you see the question that's been put in here with Pharaoh, why did God just kill all the firstborn sons? Because they weren't covered by the shedding of blood. Now, did you catch that? They were told, Moses was told to kill a lamb, to take a male lamb in the first year of its life without any spot or blemish, and to put it on the doorpost. Now, it wasn't said put it on the doorpost only of the Israelites. Anybody could have done this, and the angel of death would have flown over and said, they're covered by the shedding of the blood of a male lamb. Why male? Adam was male. Eve didn't bring sin in. Adam did. A male brought sin in. A male has to deal with it. Jesus came. Sorry, all you pro-gender neutral sort of people. It doesn't work like that in God's world. Jesus had to be a male. He couldn't have been a female. He couldn't have been a trans. He couldn't have been LGBT, whatever other adjectives you want to add to that. He had to be a male. Why? God makes the rules. You and I don't. So when you have a look at this, in the animal world, why was it included in the fall? What Joseph said is right. Adam was given dominion over the whole planet. Whatever Adam did would affect the whole of his property, right? Even today, any of you fathers who are out there, the sins of the fathers pass on to the third or fourth generation. They really do. If you're a drunkard, I grew up beside drunkards, and I saw the effects of their activities pass on to their children, their children's children. No money for textbooks, no money for school uniforms. The kids didn't deserve that, but yet they suffered. That is the way the world really works. It's sad, but it's true. And you and I can so easily retreat back and say, Jesus, I'm sorry. Adam could have said, Jesus, I'm sorry. What do we do about this? And God already had a plan intact. I think that's probably enough on that one, but it's a really important one. You see the totally big picture. Craig, why don't you move on to applying this to animals? Sorry. We discussed about applying it to your specialty as a forester with plants, and your real important specialty as the Seahorse World manager, curator, etc. So take it away.
Okay, thanks, John. Is that coming up there?
Yes.
Yep, great.
Yeah, we can,
Yeah, so
see those seahorses. We're all good.
I certainly will start with the animals. I was just thinking on that Adam thing as well, is that I don't think we fully appreciate the responsibility that God put upon Adam. You know, when Jesus is called the second Adam himself as the creator of the universe, and linking that sort of authority there with the first Adam, I think we don't really appreciate it. And just think about the way that humans in their sin can mistreat animals, like a dog, for example. If you mistreat a dog, what happens to the dog? It then becomes a creature that can become very cruel as well and start to do bad things to other animals or to people as well. But in our business of Seahorse World, we breed seahorses. Of course, they're not normally in the mass groupings that we have in our tanks. This is the Tasmanian potbelly seahorse. It's one of the biggest seahorses. They're females there with a couple of young ones hanging off the head of one of them. And we breed them en masse, but normally they're not occurring in mass groupings like that. And it's an unnatural environment, of course. There's one of our tanks. It's not the best picture, but it gives you the idea that we've got some thousands of seahorses in a tank. They don't normally occur in tanks. They don't normally occur inside. We've got false lighting and all that sort of thing there. So it's unnatural conditions. Now, the diseases that we can get in these seahorses usually result from the conditions that they prefer not being met. So, for example, at one stage we had some of our equipment break down and the temperature of the tanks that they prefer was exceeded, and they became susceptible to a viral disease, and we had deaths. Now, this doesn't occur a lot, I've got to say, in our farm, but it does occur sometimes, especially if we have breakdowns and there's unusually hot weather, for example, and our equipment can't keep the temperatures down. So that's when they become more susceptible. And in a fallen world, as we've been talking, that's when we get the conditions that aren't ideal as they were in the original good created world. So we see that in a number of ways. Now, in my former life, I was a forester and dealt with the growth of trees, and particularly for timber purposes. And this is a pest, the Cyrex wood wasp, of particularly pine trees, and it's a big problem in Tasmania and throughout plantations in Australia. It's a wasp that lays eggs in trees or on the trees, and then the larvae end up boring into the tree, and a fungus associated with that then basically destroys the water intake and the nutrient intakes of trees. So it's a real pest, but it really only occurs in trees that are under stress. So plantations are, again, mass cultures, monocultures, and they can be planted very densely. And as they grow, they can be under stress just by the competition of the trees in close proximity to each other. So the Cyrex wood wasp will attack the weaker trees that are under duress. And I'm not saying that's necessarily something that didn't happen in the good created world. Plants aren't, I don't think, like animals in terms of suffering, and plants need to be thinned out in some way at some point. So maybe in the good world, the trees that were not doing as well as their neighbours might be attacked by these things, because the wood wasp only attacks the stressed trees. So it's all about balance. Is it a result of a degraded world after the fall? Well, possibly to some extent, as we plant mass cultures of trees that aren't really that natural. And so trees growing on poor sites or in areas that they're not normally found in are more susceptible to it. So under stress, it can be due to lack of moisture intake, the soil types they're growing on, or, as I said, in too high a density. So there's problems with mass monocultures, and actually in some of the books that I've been looking at with this and studying, is that maintaining diversity in an environment can really help reduce the impact of insect pests. Apart from, using chemical treatments, which I guess are unnatural and not required in a good, perfect, created world. that's it from me. Just a short one there, but yeah, the important thing is the fact that insects really impact trees that are under stress.
Craig, just to ask a question, because I've been to your property and you've got the little block up the hill there. Do you see any of this happening on that little block?
Well, actually, I do. I might be able to grab a branch. Oh, I can't see it. I can't see it quickly. Sorry, but I do actually have a sample of a branch that's been attacked by a swift moth, and we get a lot of these occurring. Again, the monoculture of a southern blue gum plantation has, created this problem. Really, we've got so many trees that this moth can really take off in, and then the black cockatoos come in and they're searching for the grub. They chew away the bark and make a big hollowing out in the upper branches of the tree, and then the wind comes and that snaps off, and it really impacts the growth of the trees. But it's really a problem, again, because of the lack of diversity in the environment, because you're growing a mass plantation over 150 acres or whatever it is that we've got there.
So basically you have monoculture is a real cause of issues in this business, I guess.
It really is. Yeah, that's really the big issue, the lack of diversity, which of course wouldn't have been such a big problem in the original diverse created world.
Now, you and I had a discussion one day, because I've been to Tasmania quite a few times. We have big pine forest plantations up here that are used by the paper millers and things like that. And yet you made a comment that the Pinus radiata, the one we use for our breeding, is the most degenerate of all of them, because we're breeding so many. Could you comment on what you meant by that?
Yes, the Pinus radiata is one of the most planted trees on the planet. It's grown in South America and New Zealand, Australia, and other places. And it's one of the most highly selected trees out there, because you don't want the bendy ones, you don't want the ones that have got too many large branches, you want the ones with the nice straight timber grain in them. And so these are continually selected out in seed orchards and in cloning trials and nurseries, etc., so that you've over the years now we've got down to this tree that's great for timber, but it hasn't got the genetic diversity necessarily to withstand various diseases and problems that come up with changes in the environment. So that's a loss of genetic diversity rather than, again, it's going the opposite way to what evolution would say. And Charles Darwin, of course, used domestic selection as an example of how evolution could work, but it actually works the other way. It becomes a problem.
So basically, whether it's sheep and worms or many of the things Diane was talking about, it's a mess up of the environment, it's an imbalance, and the end result is not favourable either to the organisms or to us. Is that what you're actually getting at?
That's right. And the original radiata pine, which is also called the Monterey pine, comes from the Monterey Islands near California. The actual original wild growing trees are quite rare, but people recognise the importance of preserving them for the genetic biodiversity. And they're by and large poorly formed trees. They're not great for timber, the wild ones, but they've been selected in the forest industry to be good timber trees.
Okay, now when it comes to applying that to ordinary gardens, folks, think carefully. Many of our pests we have with wheat crops or corn crops are caused so often because we're now growing 1 million corn plants in one place. In God's original world, that wouldn't have happened. Many of our environmental methane problems or CO2 problems. You come with me, we visit one of our supporters, collect some fossil trees from that property and some giant diprotodont bones. You've been there, Joe. And on the way, we pass a mega cattle production unit. Zillions of cattle per acre, and we have a real methane problem. But in reality, it's caused by the fact that in that small an area, you can't even get enough methane soaking up bacteria into the cattle. So it's the concentration that's been artificially altered. In my gardens, and Joe, you might want to comment on this too if you've noticed it, but I noticed ages ago that if I keep my vegetables healthy, my cabbages, my lettuce, my all of those things, and then the bugs come along, the first plants they attack are the weak ones, the unhealthy ones. The picture of evolution with, you know, a zebra, a healthy young zebra being attacked by a hungry old lion is simply far from the truth. He can't catch the healthy young zebra. He goes after the weak one. He goes after the lame one. And so you find that out there, what is so-called natural selection does not make things evolve. It eliminates. And the same seems to be true for my plants in the garden. So if you want a trick about that, then you can plant your weak, unhealthy looking plants around the edges, and they're the first ones the bugs come across. But even in that change of environment, like we've had lots of rain this year, and I said to Diane the other day, or my wife, or both of them, that this year will be a bad year for our only native nut that's become commercial. Sadly, we've got to say, give the full credit to the Americans. They saw the value of macadamia nuts, right? They grew big plantations of them in Hawaii. But out here, if we have a lot growing, because it used to be known as the Queensland nut because it grows in my state, and before that it was known as the Borpal nut because Borpal was where it was found, Mount Borpal, right? It's not too far from here. But in a wet year, here's what happens: no crop. Oh, you get plenty of flowers, you get plenty of nuts, but the grass is so long, the little moth called the blue moth, it's actually grey, but when it's in the grass flying around, it looks bluish. It not only breeds, it breeds higher and higher up. And then there's so many of them, you find they go even higher and lay their eggs in the base of the nut. And you may get lots of shells, but you don't get much of a crop. It's all, there's a nice little hole, beautifully. It looks like someone's drilled a hole in. In reality, it's drilled a hole out. So it's the balance which needs to be kept. When Adam sinned, the first part of the curse was the balance started to fall apart. The first balance, he no longer had access to the tree of life. That's a pretty bad imbalance. But from then on, the weather, Noah's flood, summer, winter, rain, storms, that's a balance change. And it even produced more mosquitoes, wasn't it, Diane? Yes. And they are looking for food. Yeah. So many of these diseases are related to that imbalance. Anything else to comment on there, Craig?
Yeah, well, and the lack of knowledge of humans in managing the environment. We don't have a perfect knowledge by any stretch of the imagination. I remember in my lectures at university on pests and diseases that chemicals can actually, chemical control of pests can actually increase the problem in the long term, and that mass areas of, for example, wheat out in the western areas of Australia, you've got these mass areas of wheat and all the native vegetation has been cleared. What you've actually done is remove a lot of the natural biological controls that would keep that balance that you've been talking about. So there's no birds there anymore because there's nowhere for them to nest and live that would normally otherwise keep insect pests, for example, under control. So the balance is thrown out.
If you want a good garden, grow an overcrowded garden where the ones you want to eat, you know where they are. All the rest is for the bugs and the birds, and you find that actually has a great benefit. Then you can pull the plants you want and you can chop up the rest and use them as mulch. That works even in forestry, doesn't it, Craig?
Yeah, it does. And I've always been really a native forester more than a plantation one, so I've certainly seen that in the native forest situation. But you're not talking about your garden, are you, John?
Not just necessarily my garden at the moment, no. But in reality, when I plant things, some years I'll do that when I know there's a lot of pests coming because of how much rain we've had. So we give them plenty of food. Joe, you're a gardener, you're an animal breeder. Any comments from you at that level?
I mean, I think you've covered most. Yeah, just to say that I've observed pretty much the same thing as well. You'll find you've got to bear in mind that the whole idea of natural selection, right, survival of the fittest, side of that, extinction of the unfit. It doesn't help you evolve. It doesn't help you change. It just means all those that are weak, actually. It's also one of the biggest issues with trying to fit the idea of evolution into scripture, right? Because you're saying that God is using a process is reliant upon death in order to create. I mean, it's just a contradiction of each other, right? So just be careful when you do that. But yeah, pretty much the same observations for me.
Good. Well, I see a question there which I'm going to answer in terms of Australia. It says, is your new museum on Google Maps? Well, here in Australia, to help all of those of you who have iMaps or anything, you'll find Jurassic Ark is on iMaps. But when we checked it last week, it sends you 100 meters round the corner past. We're going to correct it as much as we can because Google does this sometimes, but it is on iMaps. My wife was called the other day and she said, where are Tweed Heads? How far is it to Jurassic Ark? Now, she's never the best at any time to tell you how far anything is from somewhere else. And with her affliction, and I said affliction, she is suffering from memory loss. And that's a degenerative disease. Craig's mum is also suffering from that. Probably 20% of the population at the moment is suffering from that degenerative disease. We have no idea what really triggers off, but it is there. And so you'll find that the best way to find out where Jurassic Ark is to come to our open day on September the 24th. You can go to iMaps. We will have it fixed, we promise. You'll remember that, Diane, and make sure that it takes you to the right place. But until then, instead of turning left at number 108, just go straight in through the Sand Gateway at 108 at Sykes Road. What about your museum, Joe?
Well, let me share the screen so you can actually see it all. You can see that we are on Google Maps. The centre itself will be registered on Google Maps very shortly, as in the Creation Research Centre, as well as Creation Research UK. But it's all part of the same thing. You can go and see where we are. You can see us in the grand context of everything as well, in terms of where we are in the UK. As Oswald Street out a little bit further, we're right on the border of England and Wales, as you can see, and we're about sort of just over an hour to Birmingham, under an hour to Manchester. That's sort of go to Birmingham. I want to say there we are, about just around 3 hours.
How very rude, Joe. Why wouldn't you want to go to Birmingham?
I know. Well, I've been there before. That's why. We're about 3 hours away from the majority of the UK's population, so we're actually fairly centralised, which is wonderful. We are on Google Maps.
Well, thank you, Joe. Everywhere in England is about 3 hours away from the main population, as far as I'm concerned, in that tiny country.
Well,
but dokie dokie, if you're going to give Joe 5 stars on Google because he's got a warehouse with stuff everywhere at the moment, then how about you go to Jurassic Ark and give us 10 stars, because we've got 10 hectares of beautiful displays, forestry, flowers, orchids, and fossils galore, including on the day the world's biggest diprotodon skull. Yes, you heard me correct. And we're going to have some other fabulous stuff there, aren't we? All right, Joe, it's probably time for me to take the last section here. So we'll do our best to try and get us on. Okay. All right, my first job is to deal with what do you actually believe about Scripture, because looking at the chat, it's interesting to watch the questions that come up, some of which have nothing to do with the topic, except they've got everything to do with what he believes about Scripture and who the God of the Scripture says that he is, what's he like, etc. Okay, here am I in a very naturally selecting against environment. You see the roof was missing from this room at a cafe, and it was freezing out there on the patio. The windows were all intact to keep the wind away, but I was cold. Australians were naturally selected against environmental discrimination. But we went straight from there and we were out in the field. Yes, you can notice I got black trousers on because, well, we had an hour after church. What better to do after church until lunch is ready than go and look at the rocks and fossils? So snow was abundant in Canada where I was preaching. You see, that's what produced this. No, that's a bone not made out of snow. It's still in the original rock that I got it in. You see, there's a nice round bone there, an end of a bone, perhaps a joint of some description, but the bone's all cracked. Now, when I left it, it wasn't all cracked. What's going on? Well, here's the bone, a fuller picture. You will notice it's got cracks, it's got fractures, etc. It's actually got things that are inside it. Well, what are we looking at? When I found this, I actually sent it to my friend who's a medical doctor. Asked him, was it what I thought it was? Or what had actually happened? You see, the shed my bone had been stored in had collapsed under the weight of the snow. Not only was the roof missing, it was down on my bone and it smashed it to pieces. This is a dinosaur bone I dug up years ago and I wanted it back. Ah, there's the bit we couldn't find. Perhaps it's still in the rubble of the shed that collapsed with the weight of snow. Now, I don't know about you, but I've read Genesis and there's no mention of snow and ice till the book of Job. It wasn't there before Noah. It wasn't even there after Noah when winter and summer get a mention. The end was missing. You notice we've now repaired quite a bit of the actual bone. Oh, it's looking good. In fact, I've put the end back on. You say, how can you do that? You can't remember a bone you put in a shed 7 years ago. How do you know what the end looks like? Well, if there's anything John Mackay is good at, it's taking pictures. You see, on my phone alone, my iPhone, I've got some 35,000 pictures. And they're all searchable, by the way. Okay, do you see the joint that I've put there? Yes, the joint is on my original phone, my phone file, my photo files, and these were in the slide days up that, before we had digital. And we like to remind people that when God made the world, it was very good. Okay, keep that in mind, because we've asked you, what do you actually believe about Scripture? And there's all sorts of discussion going on about where did sin come from, desire to sin, Satan's desire to sin. Great questions. Perhaps we should run a whole program on that, Joe, one day, because it's obviously a persistent theme out there. But there's something you cannot be ambivalent about. The Bible says God made the world. The Bible says not only did he make the world, not only did he make it good, he made it very good, and he stamped his nature on it. God is without sin. The world was without anything bad at all. The world had no sin, no bad things. It was very good. Which brings me up to that question. When did this rock containing this fossil form? Smashed? Well, like that, it occurred in a big snowstorm that dumped feet and feet, a meter of snow on the top of the building till it crashed. And yours truly, John Mackay, spent days and days restoring every single bit, using matrix to fill in the missing pieces. Oh, you can see there we're restoring the end bit. That's a bit of bread dough. Yeah, see that white bit at the right-hand side? I made up my own bread dough to actually put it in there, and as it rose, it would push the bit to the right distance. Interesting, the things you have to do to restore a bone to the right shape. But when it got smashed, here's what we found inside it. A tumor. Several bone tumors. Yes, confirmed by medical experts, this animal would have been in pain. Not before the roof crashed, not after the roof crashed on it, but well before the creature was collected by me and before it even died originally. In fact, it may very well have died because of these tumors that were spreading through its body. This rock that is in John Mackay's collection formed after Adam sinned. My friend and I, Vance Nelson, pictured in the slide there, he and I were doing a dinosaur exploratory trip, and we're in Montana, USA. Now, Vance is based in Canada. You can get in touch with him if you need details to ask him for ministry. Just get in touch with us. But look at the rock that he's playing with. There's that crummy soil. We have at Jurassic Ark, we have several bone pits. We showed you some of them last week. See how crumbly the soil is? And we actually use those pits to show the kids how to use prodders. because you don't want to be chopping into this soil, which is like crumbly sort of soap with a big mattock and a D8 tractor. Just use the prodders to find out where the bones are. But look at the question. It's the same one. When did this rock containing this fossil form? What is this fossil? Well, it's a dinosaur vertebrae. But any of you who knew that it was a dinosaur vertebrae may recognize that it's covered with arthritis. Yes, how do we know that? Well, Dr. Diane Eager is sitting beside me, and all of those growths on any bone joint, if you had it in your own back, you'd be in pain, wouldn't you, Diane?
It certainly would be.
Okay.
Yes.
Arthritis, those growths that occur on your bones that sort of interfere with your movement, which brings us back to this question. When did this fossil form? Now, again, a reminder, and Diane has said it, I'll say it, Joseph will say it. If you want to know whether you believe the Bible, you have to deal with the fact that there's the end of chapter 1. God saw all that he made, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, all that he made, and it was very good. And in chapter 2, you discover they're all vegetarian. God made plants especially for Adam, and there's no death, there's no killing, there's no bloodshed, there's no disease, there's no tumors. God made the world very good, and the corollary, the consequence, suffering only came after man sinned. Now, any of you with arthritis out there can test this hypothesis with no trouble at all. Wait till the middle of winter and you're lying in bed there and you get this amazing revelation. I wonder what will happen if I jump out of bed and my bare feet hit the cold floor. What will that do to my arthritis? Well, you'll discover the meaning of the word suffering. The pain will shoot up your back and you go, oh, what an idiot I am. Suffering is not good. Or it's a warning to you that something is wrong with your bones. In reality, this rock with the arthritis adhesions that would give you such pain in real life, this dinosaur was in pain. Nothing like Jurassic Ark world where they're running along at high speed and all of that sort of thing, looking as if there's no trouble in the world at all. That rock was in a pained dinosaur. So is this one. Dinosaur bone, a diseased iguanodon. Now, the iguanodons were the first group of dinosaurs that were really worked on from the Isle of Wight. But this one here, big 3 toes, have a look at the afflictions it's suffering. There's been a fracture and it's healed, but not the right way. There's also an arthritic joint. I mean, my wife's not only got the edges of dementia, but she's also got arthritis, which seems to be part of the problem. Arthritic joints, hers are swollen, they're painful. We've got those special gloves for her. Didn't exist in this dinosaur's day, but what you find is that fossil, that leg, that bone only were fossilized after Adam's sin. Now, are you getting the picture? If you seriously claim to believe the Bible, then any fossil you find with a disease in it, the Bible says when Adam sinned, the whole of creation was condemned. The whole of creation suffered. The consequences of the fall passed on every part of creation from the smallest molecule out to the furthest star. If you think of a star exploding, none of that in the first week of creation. You'll find all of those things are devastating consequences of what Adam had done. That's why Craig so wisely said, if you have a dog and you kick it, you not only end up with a bad man, you'll end up with a bad dog. Can I encourage you, before we take any questions on this section, go to creationresearch.net, click search, insert dinosaur. In fact, when we come back to us, Diane, bring us back to us if you wouldn't mind. Sam, if you'll put up a couple of websites that they can go to. There we are. Okay, now, anybody got any questions, or do we have any other need to actually give thanks for some stretched fingers or some cups of coffee? I mean, I think it's Doki Doki gives us coffee every week. No wonder I'm feeling high.
Yes,
that's great.
We definitely appreciate coffee at this time of the morning in Australia.
We do indeed. Okay, Sam, you got any websites there for us? And Joe, you got any comments on fossils with afflictions and diseases? Because I've got another couple of sessions to go through on this issue here?
Well, actually, we talked about diseased dinosaurs in one of our radio programs, and one of them was about a dinosaur that had a sore throat. Now, you can imagine a dinosaur with the sort of necks that they have. What a mega sore throat that would have been.
It certainly would have been a big problem. No,
Yes.
swallowing something would have really got you down.
Yeah.
But how did they know?
One of my
It showed the signs of a bacterial infection that we know about that occurs in bones these days, and they found this just like your fossil bone with the arthritis and the fossil bone with the tumor. Diseases do actually affect the way bones grow, because bone is actually a dynamic tissue. It's not just like solid concrete. It's constantly being remodeled, and so diseases do affect it, and you can see the change in the internal structure.
Now, the reason for that section, before Joe has a chance here, is if you're a theistic evolutionist, your view of the history of the world is a David Attenborough false, glorious, wonderful view of anything but reality. When you look at dinosaurs, they're dead, not good. When you look at dinosaurs, they're afflicted, they suffered, not good. And you're trying to tell us you believe God made the world very good? Forget it. You are hypocritical at the best. And there's other words I could use, but they might take me to court. You will find that you are not dealing with a real God who made a real world, and you're saying he didn't do it the way he did in Genesis. You're claiming the dinosaurs fossilized millions of years ago as part of God's plan. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. Deal with the truth. Dinosaurs suffered. Sad, but true. Joe, any fossils that you know of that have afflictions?
I was just going to comment on a couple of the things from our museum collection. We have examples of bones with tumors and arthritis and so on and so forth. But I think perhaps my favourite example, I can't take actually my mum who found it on one of our first ever fossil trips to the island. Very famous for dinosaur bones, and we found a little bit of dinosaur bone, that being from the rib of an iguanodon, right? One of the first dinosaurs that you would study that you were talking about, John. You could kind of see the curvature of the rib, but there was a sharp break in it, and then there was a lump that had grown out. And when we took it into the fossil expert, he said, look, you can actually see the fracture where the iguanodon obviously fell or flumped down the rib. And then what's more, not only did this dinosaur go through an amount of pain with the broken rib, actually healed itself, because that's what that abnormal that's actually healed itself over it. So you've got evidence of immense record as well as a great design of being actually able to repair it. But again, you've got that issue with trying to fit that into a world where very good, but there was millions of years of death and disease and suffering and beforehand. So you've got a conflict of beliefs there, and as John said, hypocritical at best and many other things at worst. Very, very carefully think about the implications of that God used evolution.
Okay, now some of those things we mentioned on those two DVDs. This one here, Did a Good God Make Bad Bugs? That was personally handed to David Attenborough, so he has no excuse. Secondly, one of my professor friends challenged him and said, listen, David, you're so adamant that the creationists are wrong. Why don't you debate John Mackay? Yes, it's nice to have friends in the professorial ranks who actually believe in creation. And quote unquote, David Attenborough's answers, because I wouldn't win. He would lose. He knows. I mean, have a look at his programs. They are brilliant. Absolutely full credit to the photography and all of that. It's just glorious. But he doesn't teach you. He preaches to you about an evolutionary blind side. Yes, David, we're still willing to do a debate if you're watching, and it'd be great if you were watching. And of course, the other one, this was done at a Seventh-day Adventist conference on really health, worms and germs and things like that. Where do they all come from? How do they all fit in? And over again, you find on both of those DVDs, it deals with the issue of, here's the perfect world. Look what happened when sin came in. Here's how it affects things. So it encourages you. You may not want the old DVD now, but you may want the streaming. And Sam, put up the address where they can get streaming from, or MP4s, MP3s, all of those fancy words that are now available from creation research. Okay, we might move on to the next section. Diane, if you want to put me back up again.
This one, yes.
Okay, good. Let's move past the white blank. Are we back up there, guys?
Yeah, we're all
Have we
good.
disappeared? Good. Okay.
No, we're good.
Sorry, I'm trying to deal with a cat, so I was on mute.
Yeah, part of the fall, hey, Sam.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we look at this issue here, what problems did Darwin have that would lead people like Attenborough to go with him so strongly? Remember where Diane started? I mean, David Attenborough launches his archive project dealing with animals and the whole situation. And when you look at his comments that we quoted to start with, 2003, about did God create a worm that can only live in no other way than an innocent child's eyeball? Remember that comment? It's simple. The worm doesn't live in the eyeball, it dies. And then your eyeball surrounds it with a calcium deposit to stop the infection from the rotting tissue getting into your body. God had a backup even for worms that somehow would get into your eye. And please don't think it's aiming for your eye. David, listen carefully. We've said it to you before. We'll say it again. These worms, where they end up depends on where the fly bites you on the body. Does it bite you on the head? Does it bite you on the leg? Lots of diseases come, and they're all different, but caused by the worm, the same worm, in a different position. But going one step further, Nature did an interview with David Attenborough, and this applies to Bill Nye, it applies to so many people. Why is teaching evolution now more important than ever? Pretty picture on the book, pretty nice, lovely, child-friendly frog there. Why is teaching evolution more important? Because of the influence of the Bible's book of Genesis. Do you realize they know exactly what this is about? The Bible's book of Genesis, treated in authority, does not say that. If you're trying to resolve that picture, like the theistic evolutionists, millions of years of death and struggle gave rise to a creation that God calls very good. David Attenborough can't do it. Bill Nye can't do it. And you're wasting your time trying to do it because it simply won't work. David Attenborough says, we've got to get rid of this. God created the world a very good place. And then it moves on. By the end of chapter 1, you have man made in God's image. God's image, a reflection of God. He's like God. He may not be God, but God is very good. So man is very good. That's your starting point. Do you believe that? Because David Attenborough knows what it means. Charles Darwin knew what it meant. Can you now spot Charles Darwin's problem? Why do we put it that way? Because he wrote this book. I mean, that's what he's famous for. Or you don't normally see that huge title on the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races. You didn't need to read the book. But you see, what most people don't appreciate is that Charles Darwin had a prejudice, a bias, something he's not going to tell you. In fact, can I encourage you, if you are dealing with aggressive people who are attacking you at church, at university, whatever, listen for what they're not saying. The origin of species. Charles Darwin trained as a theologian. Why didn't he write on the origin of kinds, on the origin of the groups mentioned in Genesis? Well, he picked species because he knew the Bible didn't speak about species. In the struggle for life, he knew the Bible didn't speak about struggle for life in the beginning. Here was his struggle after his favorite daughter, Annie, died. Oh, this is from his great-great-grandson, right? Written in the review that was leading up to Charles's final, celebration of the faith's 200 years or so after, 150 years after his book came out. After Annie's death, Charles Darwin set the Christian faith firmly behind him. A friend died, a daughter died, and now he says Christianity can't be true. Freed from the last vestige of belief that the world was perfect because God created it that way, God continued without spiritual restraint. Darwin continued without spiritual restraint to work out his theory on the origin of species. In other words, he had a personal problem. Somebody died. If he wanted to fit it in the picture of things, he could not fit it in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 2. He didn't want to go to Genesis chapter 3. So our recommendation is that Darwin's book on the origin of the species should really be retitled that, My Revenge. Now, can I encourage you, in Victoriana, Queen Victoria's morally astute, upright England, can you spot problems in what Charles Darwin would have heard in the churches? All things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, dinosaurs, lions, tigers, the purple-headed mountains, the snowy-covered hills. What? The snowy-covered hills weren't there in the book of Genesis. There's no snow until the book of Job. You see, the Victorian church was firmly committed to onward, upwards, England forever. And yet the Bible they should have been hearing about in churches is that. Charles Darwin at Theological College should have been hearing about that. But he was hearing about all things bright and beautiful. Man sinned. God cursed the ground. Death entered the planet. And the world's history, from good to bad. You see, if you leave out from the history of England, from the history of Rome, from the history of the world, that little four-letter word, which the theologians, particularly around the time of the Reformation, rediscovered the blessing of how God dealt with that issue, not how Darwin would have dealt with it, not how the Catholic prelates would have dealt with it, but how Jesus dealt with it. You see, God created the world perfect. He gave man all the rules, and yet man, using his will, chose to sin. And God had already prepared a way out. Oh, not Noah's flood. Noah's flood would just kill off many of the creatures. Yep, many of the creatures were killed. Didn't necessarily die out in Noah's flood, because 2 of every air-breathing creature got on board. Hey, that's a, we're getting rid of the whole program on that, Diane. But you see, there's the point. The world changed from good to bad to worse. Have you got that? That is the real history of the planet. It's from a created perfection. Whoops, we went one step too far. There. Oops, how comes that's black? I don't understand that. But anyway, we'll keep that there and then try and figure out what happened to the next one. The world changed from good to bad to worse. Let's see if it's hiding in here somewhere. No, it isn't. It's on our screen. Yes, there we are. This is degeneration or devolution. You catch those words? Now, old, Richard David Attenborough and all of his friends don't like the concept of devolution. Some of the worst skeptics that I've debated don't really want John Mackay talking about devolution, because devolution is all you got, folks. The pine trees becoming worse, the vegetables becoming worse, unless you kick in a little bit of entropy there and add your brains and then leave them alone, and they'll go backwards. Yes, the world is changing, the world is degenerating. But question, in that whole picture, it'll be the last section I deal with, but we're going to take another question opportunity here. On that whole line from Adam to sin to Noah to Babel to nations and tribes, all the way down to us with our current list of diseases, environmental problems, can you think of where disease is first mentioned? I mean, we said this is really about, do you actually believe the scripture? And reality, there's the picture, just following through from chapter to chapter. But have you ever gone looking for when the first person ever got sick? It wasn't Noah. Noah didn't die of sickness. Did Adam ever have a cold? No record mentioned of that. Well, Diane, switch me back onto live screen again. And we'll see if there's any other opportunities for questions there or any other thank yous. Sam?
Okie dokie. Right. We've had a plethora of questions all throughout the stream. I've tried to keep up as best as I possibly can, but sometimes things do move very quickly for me. So we have a... oh, goodness me, where has it gone? We've got a super chat from Neil for 10 British buckaroos. God bless you, Neil. Thank you so much. And Doki Doki, 5 US buckaroos, a video game controller, posted triumphantly in between the words critical hit. I think it's supposed to be in the style of critical hits. I don't know. And
I assume
Doki
that's
Doki.
something good, not a disaster.
No, I think that's a good thing, especially in the world of
Critical in
gaming.
medicine usually means a problem.
Now, Doki Doki as well, coming in with 5 US buckaroos. Ham's doing
that's great. Thank you so
5.
much.
Yes, God bless you guys. Thank you so much. You really do help the ministry keep going, rather. Right, okay. So just quickly, I just want to address something that's been going on in the chat. I'll put myself full screen very briefly. Okie dokie. So here at Creation Research, we do encourage debate. We do encourage chat. We do encourage lively discussion. And some people have brought up that sometimes the discussion is not on topic and can be slightly distracting. I'm of two minds of this. I think that we need to encourage debate and responses and things like that in a civilized manner. But also, I think keeping questions to the topic at hand can be also beneficial. Not detracting from anything. I think we need to encourage discussions. I think we also need to be respectful of everyone else as well, who are here to sort of listen on the topic at hand. So it's about using your best judgment, I think, in the chat here. That's my piece anyway. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything on that, but that's just me. But we can delve right into some questions. And Ravi has sent something at towards sort of mid to early part of the stream. It's been sitting in here for a while, so I thought I'd better address it. So the question here is: the desire to sin itself a sin? If so, where did Adam and Eve get the desire to sin before sin was introduced into the world by the rebelling against God and eating from the tree?
Sam, can I make a suggestion? Ravi's been on this theme for quite a few weeks. Why don't we allocate at least a half a program rather than continually answering questions that are very, very similar? Joe, what do you think of that idea?
I think that's a very, very good idea. Pulling up what our next few streams are about, because we scheduled, so I was going to see if there's anything that we could kind of, I think we should really, because this is back to a number of different things. It's where did the idea of original sin come from? Is the desire to sin the same as sin? Did God cause Adam and Eve to sin? And John, we've been discussing things like that about sort of, shall we say, doctrinal things, right? To do with Calvinism or Arminianism or all that kind of stuff. And I think it'd be good to deal with that, but also the concept of where did evil come from? Or, did God create evil? Did God have anything to do, drawing of the line to say what is good and what is evil? And I'm just looking up now. Basically, we're scheduled up until the 16th of September, and I know, John, the 16th of September, which we currently have for questions and answers, and I believe you're not available for the week after. So how about following week, whatever that is, we schedule a whole thing about where did the idea of evil come from, who created evil, original desire for sin, and all this kind of stuff. How does that sound?
That sounds good to us. Diane, you'll still be in the UK, correct? So you'll be available to do that one. There's also another version of that, which we haven't seen yet in the chat, but for those of you who are interested in this area, again, keep that date in mind. But we had a pastor make a comment recently, oh yes, the world was very good, but it wasn't perfect. And we thought, what? And then we raised it with someone from a Pentecostal college, did his training at a theological college, and he said, oh yes, the world was very good, but it wasn't perfect. And you think, man, that's opening a whole yard full of different, what do you mean by that? How do you get that? Where's it from? But it will be perfect one day, they went on to say. So anyway, I think all of those issues, we can put them together on that date. What is that date again, Sam?
I was, so the date coming up, it was 30th, but I've just realised the 30th, we're also in the middle of we need to discuss what we're going to be doing for that. But the following week work, which is the 7th of October, so 7th of October would work better, but we'll in the team, we'll have stuff scheduled. I'd like to get stuff scheduled up towards sort of the end of the year for the next block. So that would be, we've got some great topics that we can deal with. But I specifically think something to do with that, good and evil origin stuff would be excellent. So,
okay, good. Topical question, Sam?
Of course, we do have topical questions. We do. I can rest you assured we have topical questions. So, okay, I've got two questions that I'm going to merge into one. So this comes from both Bold as a Lion and George Bond. So, first, what part of the question is, do sound devices deter insects like mosquitoes? So on the topic of eliminating mosquitoes, see, am I a good segue there? Would eradication of the mozzie cause any ecological issues?
That's an Australian question there, because mozzie is not spelt that way in the Oxford Dictionary, and mozzie is probably not a word used in many other countries. But Joe, you got any thoughts on this one?
Who were you asking, sorry?
Used.
Me. Yes, it would cause rather significant ecological issues, the same way as if you were to eradicate what cause major ecological issues, because quite simply they are essential pollinators, and we often think of just the bees, right, the honeybees, pollinators, and that is true. They are very significant pollinators. But remember, just in the UK, we have many different species of bee rather than just the honeybee. That's just in the UK. There's something like 40 odd different species of, I don't know the exact number of different species of mosquito, but I see quite a number of them in the UK. And what you'll find is pollinating insects are all together extremely important for the pollination, for the ecosystem things, right? And you'll find the only time that any of these become a problem is especially for the mosquitoes, is when you have, like in the UK we have mosquitoes, right, but they're not particularly bad. I mean, Australia, right, and it wasn't even the mozzie season, and it was pretty bad. This is where I went. But if you notice, there's a major difference between the climate in the UK and the climate in Australia. In Australia, the climates can be much more extreme. So you have dry seasons and then you have wet seasons. And because you have such an erratic climate, all the mosquitoes come out of the wet season, and that's when they begin to cause a problem, right? Plants to be able to obtain hemoglobin, so they start biting human beings. Find that in a very good world, where the world was perfect, where the climate was perfect as well, your mosquitoes and your bees and all your bugs would have been able to live together, not only in harmony with each other, but also in harmony with human beings. It's only when you get a sin-filled climate and you have changes and difficulties that things are going to start to degrade and degenerate and fall apart, right? But even in a cursed world which has gone from good to bad to worse, mosquitoes and stinging wasps are all still essential parts of the ecosystem for that pollinating purposes. John, any comments?
Well, yes, I think of a good example. I was in Nova Scotia, northern part, and that can be very cold in winter over there. But it was just reaching sort of midwinter, so there was no snow around. And I asked the pastor, listen, I've been here in summer and the place is crowded with biting flies and mosquitoes the size of pigeons, right? And I said, where are they? Where do they go in winter? Because they're only short-lived insects. Where do they actually go? And he said, well, come and I'll show you. And he actually lifted up one of the church boards from the wall, and here were gazillion flies fast asleep, right? Just enough warmth to keep them ticking over. And he said, as soon as the outside board warms up, they will swarm. They've got temperature indicators. They will swarm. And there'll not be enough food to keep all those millions of flies going from just the plants around. Yes, they do pollinate. Yes, they do help the plants. Yes, they will run out of plant food shortly, and they start biting you. And those bitey flies are terrible. In fact, Diane, aren't there some diseases that are caused by bitey flies, apart from the ones that you've talked about today?
Oh yes, fly spread diseases, just like any sort of biting insects can spread disease, because they will just transfer any microbes that they've come across from one person to another.
Right, and so this is in addition to poo that they walk through and walk all over your food, correct?
Yes.
Because I understood that even as a little kid. Get that fly out of here. It's been walking through the septic. And yes, it does spread disease that way as well. But if we lived in a world where there was no septics and we didn't accumulate poo or anything like that, it wouldn't be a problem, would it?
No, and the flies wouldn't bite you either.
Right. Okay, that's probably enough from us, Joe. Oh, by the way, because that's George Bond, I'll give you a free plug, George. I believe coming up in September 5 to 8, there's a conference you guys are putting on, which will probably involve Joe and I, at least dealing with the geologic column and things like that. All new presentations at your end. So have a look at the Searching Sandy for Truth website and see what's coming up on the 5th to the 8th. Next question, Sam.
I'm glad you got that correction in there, John, because I don't want people going to Searching for Truth. I might bring up something completely different. Right, okay. So we have... I've got a question that sort of means about worms, but also to do with hell as well. This came from Reboth Baptist. What did Jesus mean when he said, "Their worm dieth not"? Are there literal worms in hell?
Okay, anybody want to tackle that one?
I don't know much about that one.
I'm not entirely sure of the reference there. I'll have to have a look at that up and try and get it in some context. But how about we carry on and I'll see what I can find, unless anything else is... anybody else has got any comments?
Well, I'll make one general comment. It means if you end up in hell, your troubles are not over. You are going to endure and endure and endure. That's the simplest way of looking at that, regardless of the fact that you put a corpse in the ground, the worms enjoy it. But in reality, you are dead in trespasses and sins, but your body is still afflicted by worms. Remember the people in the scripture who says, oh, and he suddenly got worms and died? Right now, as he was dying, the worms were invading his body, and this would continue on in hell in some way, shape, or form. You are real, you are live, you are feeling, and worse than that, if you go with the story Jesus told about Abraham and the rich man could look up into where Abraham was and see what he'd missed out on. That would be a bigger problem than just a worm that's irritating you, a fireproof worm, by the way. So you'll probably find that interesting if you bring the reference up later, Joe, if you find it. Any other questions there?
Very quickly, John, very quickly, because something that I know, because I reference that story of the Jesus, the account that Jesus told of there's a lot of thinking out there that Jesus is just telling a parable here. What are your comments on?
Well, all the parables of Jesus are usually introduced by, and he told a parable. Now, this story is not introduced in that way at all. Secondly, I doubt if any Jewish listener would have said, oh, Abraham's a parable, right? Because he's described in terms of Father Abraham, in terms of the ancestors of the Jews, and the rich man and the poor man are there in the same story. And the rich man dies and goes to hell. Hell is not parabolic, right? The sick man, Lazarus, he's raised and he goes to be with Abraham. Abraham's not parabolic. And when you have a look at where he was, he's in a place of reward, a place of blessing, and he's waiting for the gates of heaven to be open for Jesus to die and rise from the dead. So there's no clues in that story. It's got the normal parable structure. Parables don't have people who necessarily lived, right? All the ones I know, they're just stories made up to illustrate a point. You could have a Greek parable. You know, the man who wanted everything to be turned to gold. Didn't happen, never did, but it makes a point. Don't want more than you actually need to stay alive. It's a very, very important point. So that's parabolic, but this does not, in my opinion. Diane, you got any thoughts? It's common out there, but I don't see it as a parable at all.
No, it's not. It's a true story, because parables are about sort of earthly, everyday events that are used by Jesus to illustrate some spiritual point to help people understand. Most of the content of this story actually happens in the afterlife. In other words, it doesn't happen in this life or on earth. So it's not like the parables. We do have a question. That particular question came into the Ask John Mackay site, so it's there on the question and answer site. and there is a more detailed answer for people who want to pursue that. But that story just does not fit the pattern of any parables. And the other thing is, Jesus was telling this story to the religious leaders. If you look at the context there, he's talking to the Pharisees and the religious leader. Jesus would never tell a made-up story about Abraham. Abraham was their revered ancestor. So Jesus would only speak the truth about Abraham.
Okay, so if you want to find that, go to creationresearch.net, click on Q&A, or click on Fact File, where we store a lot of our answers, and you'll find them, hundreds of them there, isn't there, Diane?
Yes.
So that's creationresearch.net, click Q&A or click Fact File if you want to access many of these answers. Okay, any other questions, Sam, before we move on just to the last little bit that we need to cover?
I think we will pause it there, I think. I'm trying to space out the questions that are relevant anyway.
Okay, now that's fine. Okay, bring me up to full screen, Sam. Now, can you keep in your mind the following big picture? God made the world. He made it in 6 days. He pronounced it very good. He stamps his nature on creation. This is emphasized over and over again through the scripture. Even in the fallen world, you can reach the conclusion this didn't happen by accident. And Paul says in Romans, therefore you are without excuse. Whether your name is Richard Dawkins, who says, if God made the world, why do I wear glasses? Well, I'd actually blame your smoking or something like that. Whatever it is, don't blame God, because when he made Adam, Adam didn't wear glasses. And we have the ability to create glasses because we're made in God's image. And when our body goes downhill, we can use our creative talent to actually try and think of a solution. It won't be a permanent solution, but it's okay for the moment. So you've got Adam, he's made very good, he's made in God's image. He is never listed as being sick. Remember that question that I gave you? Where does sickness appear in the Bible? Okay, Adam did not die of old age. He died because he was a sinner. In fact, have you ever noticed all the way through the Bible, it actually blames death on a moral problem. Adam lived to be 930 years, and so he died. Noah lived to be 950 years. Not one time during that is he ever listed as having the sniffles. Is his kids ever listed as having the measles or the mumps? There's no reference to disease from creation to the flood. And the world's climate, yep, it was moderate. Not too bad, not too miserable. There's no rain. The first rain is actually Noah's flood. There was a mist every day that rose up and watered the surface of the earth. So growing conditions for plants would have been superb all over the planet. You didn't have any deserts. You couldn't get flies biting you or sand rubbing in your eyes. That would create problems at all. So think carefully. Do I actually believe what the scripture says? Nobody's sick from Adam all the way through to Noah. All right, so you're going to blame sickness on God? Forget it. There's not the slightest evidence that he created sickness after Adam sinned. But by the time you get to Noah, they're still living long ages. There's still no sickness. But then immediately after Noah, Noah lives for 950 years and he dies. But then his son, Arphaxad, and then the ones that are after it, 600, 400, 300. What you'll find is that these guys are dropping in age. When is the first person listed as sick? Well, nobody in Noah's family, nobody up to Babel. You can't name one person who's listed as being sick. In fact, even Moses dies at 120. Do you remember why? He's not listed as sick at all. You see, God told Moses to speak to the rock and it would bring forth water. He'd seen this before. He'd actually done this thing before. He'd hit the rock, but God told him to. But at this time, he said, speak to it, and I will bring forth the water. Oh, Moses didn't quite get that right. He was so angry with the people of Israel, he smashed down on the rock, and he said, do I have to bring forth the water? Moses died because of that. He sinned, and he was blocked from the promised land. He did not die because he was sick, because have a look at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. And Noah, being 120 years old, and his eyes were strong, and his body was that of a young man, and so he died. No sickness there whatsoever. Come on, some of you have got glasses and you're only 16. Most of us, by the time we get to my age, 75, are decrepit. We're going downhill. Yes, I still can't see some people out there, but my eyes are pretty good still for this age, but I have been sick. It was interesting because when my brothers and sisters got the mumps or the measles in my day, they didn't run you all down for injections. They weren't really available. My mum would throw me in the bed with them. Do you know what it's like to live in the same bed as your brother for 3 weeks? It's because your mum's trying to make you sick. Fortunately, my immune system tended to be pretty good. I never got anything she put me in the bed for. But I have been sick. I have a busted thyroid. I was born with pyloric stenosis. Yes, I've been sick. Yes, I have had the flu. My wife's got the flu as well as other things at the moment, poor girl, so pray for her. Her name is Anne. Sickness is a common feature today. But who in the Bible is the first person to be listed as sick? Where do you find sickness coming up? The answer, in the book of Job. You find Adam, no sickness. By Noah, no sickness. By Babel, no sickness. Moses didn't die because he was sick. But in between those two, you'll find Job is mentioned as being sick. And then he goes on to live another several hundred years. What a lifestyle blessed of God. But he is the first person listed as sick, way after the Tower of Babel, way after the flood, way after Adam. And the sicknesses are all those that come because things go downhill, whether it's the quality of the food, whether it's the quality of the climate, or whether it's the quality of your own genetics. Some people won't even get COVID, and they've reached a conclusion it's their genetics which is stopping that. Interesting. Our body works is designed to keep you healthy, and degeneration caused initially through sin, then through the degeneration of the planet, gets to a point where every one of us says, it's got to be better than this. And that's the point. You see, God wants you to reach that conclusion because Jesus offers you the only long-term, best, eternal solution there is. Repent of the real problem, which isn't David Attenborough. The real problem isn't the British government. The real problem isn't climate change. The real problem is a three-letter word called S-I-N, self-indulgent nature, sin. And you need to ask God through Christ to forgive you of that. And you'll be amazed. Even when you become a Christian, it really can affect your attitude, which does affect your sickness health as well. This is the creation by John McKay. Hope you've enjoyed today. Sam, we've got a few minutes left. Has anyone got any other questions on this big picture issue?
Right, okay. So we have let's have a look at this one here. This one is more on topic. I was saving this one, so we'll deal with this first. Is the recent science that supports many bacteria and viruses being good for the human body in the favor of the creation narrative?
Joe, Craig, we'll come back to our doctor a little later.
Yeah, go, Joe.
Yes.
Quick and precise. Love it.
You couldn't expand on that a little, could you?
Well, the whole thing that we've been discussing today, and basically talk about when we talk about why would a good God make bad things, the whole point we're making is that he didn't make bad things, right? Being a cursed world means that the good design can be used in a bad way, whether that's out of necessity for survival or so on and so forth. We do a whole program on venom. We do sharp teeth, right? All of these are good designs which have examples today of being used for good, for a completely vegetarian animals, herbivores that have venom in age of digestion. You have complete herbivores which use their extremely sharp backward pointing serrated teeth, tearing and slicing through plants. That we're making, the whole premise of this argument is, look, they're a fallen world which you can trace back to show how they would have existed in the very good world, and in the very good, they're good design for good. In a fallen world, out of necessity, most of the things are good design in a bad way, and you can see it right in front of you, even in the case of things like chickens, right? You need to have, if you're a chicken, which is predominantly a herbivore, right? A few bugs and grubs, but predominantly grain-based food, right? And in order to digest grain, you need to have a crop. If you want a crop, you will no longer be predominantly vegetarian. You will be almost completely carnivore, right? Because you can't digest the grain completely out of bugs and grubs, or even go on to, right? So you can kind of see how mutations, which are mistakes, begin to generate an animal or a creature or a bug or a bacteria, and as a necessity, you're going to change your lifestyle to your surroundings in order to avoid natural selection killing you off, right? So you can kind of see this degeneration, this digression goes on, and what we're actually finding, the fact that more bacteria and viruses, which are an essential part in our health and our well-being. In fact, we were asked on a Christian radio station in the UK that's not particularly enthusiastic, shall we say, about creation research, but we were invited on, and one of the questions they were asking is, well, would Adam and Eve had needed to use toilets? And it's a bit of a question that sort of throws you off. In a very good world, no, you wouldn't. Just the same as you would have needed to brush your teeth in a very good world. Which causes tooth decay in the fallen world would have been the bacteria to protect your teeth in the very good world. And the reason you've gone downhill is because the bacteria have gone downhill, and so on and so forth. This back, and the discovery of bacteria that is good for you and helps you is just a confirmation that in the beginning everything was very good and for your good, as well as the rest of the planet's good.
Yes, we hear about looking after your microbiome these days. If you read on some health sites and nutrition information, and your microbiome refers to the gazillions of bacteria that actually live in your digestive system and also in the back of your nose and your throat. And they do us good. They're really important in terms of digestive health, and also for just maintaining the internal ecology, as it were, the microclimate, the microecology on your internal body surfaces. And some diseases are simply caused by these getting out of sorts, getting they're mixtures of organisms. They're not just one particular bacteria. So again, it's a matter of balance and a matter of cooperation. And with some of the diseases that we mentioned in our earlier presentations, they are simply microbes, microscopic organisms ending up in the wrong place. Those little worms that make people go blind, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with them. They're perfect if they live out in the rivers and on the riverbanks. They're not doing anybody any harm. They're only doing harm when they get to the wrong place. Now, even the bugs that live in your microbiome, as long as they stay in their right place, they're fine. They are actually good for you, and that's why it's important not to kill them off by taking too many antibiotics and eating the wrong sort of diet. If they get into places where they are not supposed to live, and there are places in the body that shouldn't have any microbes in them, but if they do get into those sort of places because of trauma or because of some other disease letting them in, yes, you will get very, very ill. So it's not only bugs have gone down, the interaction between many bacteria and viruses, right? It's a whole ecosystem of microbes that gets out of sorts, or the organisms get into the wrong place. But in the very good world, they would have all been in the right place, and you would have had the right proportions and the right sort of interactions. So in fact, recent science is showing more and more that the creation view of the world, the creation history of the world is exactly right. Diseases are caused by things getting out of place or out of sorts, out of the ecology being messed up, as much as our bodies degenerating and the microbes degenerating.
I had an auntie who died of serious ulceration problems. In fact, all her life, when I knew her, she was very thin. She couldn't stand to eat much because it aggravated, just grating down food through your throat and everywhere. you have ulcers along that tissue, then it's very, very painful. It was only a few months after she died that they discovered that many of these ulcerations were actually caused by a total imbalance in the bacteria in her gut, right? And so whether the bacteria decided to attack her or what, I don't know. I don't remember the details, but I do remember reading the report that said these bacteria need to be added to the stomach to balance it out, and actually that seemed to be a cure for that sort of ulceration. So it is, again, the balance, and these bacteria are very, very helpful. And of course, since we're talking about diet and what you eat, I make a point of only eating vegetarian cows, right? I say that seriously because when they fed them for, chopped up other cows and fed them to the cows, gave them meat supplement through their grain, we ended up with mad cow disease. Remember that? That's the disease where you laugh and moo at the same time, they tell me. But in reality, no, it will send you mad as well. And it's a dangerous situation because some of the chopped up food from the brains of the cows that they previously throw into the mix, they were still active chemicals, even though the brain was technically dead. It would still activate the next cow to pass on this disease. And if you were eating that cow, then you could get it as well. Remember the mad cow disease?
No, I remember that cow disease. Yes.
So be careful. When God told us to eat meat, he did tell us, to be very careful in the way we prepare our food and cook and where we poo in the toilet and things like that. As the world went downhill, all of the whole situation, it now takes us much longer to make our food clean, prepare it, make it poison-free, all those sort of things. We've tried to find a solutions which don't get solutions at all. How are we going with Joe's microphone there that some people are complaining about?
Well, that's the thing, is it's coming across really clear on our end, well, for me anyway, but other people seem to be having issues. However, we did have a few issues earlier, but
hopefully it's soon. Now that we have the centre in place, Lord willing, very soon we will have a proper studio set up in there, which means that we won't have to keep Bluetooth connections, plugging in and plugging out and everything else. Leave it set up, Lord willing.
And we won't have falling cats, Joe. And we won't have falling cats.
Yeah, hopefully not. Absolutely. Yeah.
I can feel the pain on that.
We've got a question, if there's one more question, because we're running over time a little bit, but that's fine. They have one more question to wrap up the night, I think.
I will put in a question that everyone can answer. Even me, I can answer a question. How about that? Ravi asks, question: does being a young Earth creationist make relationships, family, work, etc. more tricky when there are disagreements?
You go first, Sam.
All right then, if you insist, John. Okay, so in my life, I've had a few ups and downs with the Lord, to put it lightly. I have been a believer and a vehement atheist. So I've seen both sides of the argument. And being obviously a Christian young Earth creationist now, there have been issues within family. I have an aunt and uncle who are quite atheist. And I remember one point during a walk, me and my parents were having a walk, and we saw those pods that if you touch them, they all like curl up and squirt the seeds everywhere and make your skin all itchy. And we were just like, oh, what a brilliant demonstration of design, God's design. And then not even 30 seconds later, my uncle said to my cousins who were quite young at the time, oh, see, what a brilliant demonstration of evolution, which was certainly, we all looked at each other like, okay, all right, fair enough, get the point. But on the flip side, it's actually been quite positive. In the job that I just left before my current one, everyone was quite interested in my beliefs. And also we're very interested in creation research as well. I brought in fossils and dinosaur bits and bobs and all sorts of things. People were very fascinated, and they were asking, genuine questions like, oh, do you believe this? Do you believe that? And I say, well, yes, no, etc., etc., etc. But I think it can cause a little bit of some issues. But I think, to be honest, in terms of personal, like relationships with your family, the topic doesn't really come up, in my opinion, anyway. In my experience, it's only if it's deliberately brought up that there'll be disagreements and some tension, possibly, depending on how vehemently atheist they are. But that's my experience. Anyone else?
Craig?
Yeah, well, I am obviously a young Earth creationist. I think it's more of a problem to people being a Christian than a young Earth creationist, probably per se. But as an employer, I employ mostly non-Christians, including some atheists. And I guess I'm in a power position being the employer, but I never hide my faith. We've often had a lot of discussions around it. I'm quite happy for my staff to have a different opinion. But always wanting to enter into open discussion about things. Having opened the Creation Discovery Centre right next to our business has created some interesting dynamics. But I guess because I am very confident and strong about my beliefs, people tend to respect them. That are close to you, at least. They know you're serious. They know you're genuine about it. They tend to respect your beliefs, even though they may disagree with them. So maybe in younger life it's harder to balance that with other people. But as you get older, I think, and you're very confident and sure about what you're believing, people tend to respect that.
Well, how about I make one comment and Joe can finish off, because he's had a few interactions at university, and that's where I found it the most difficult, because it was very evident that you have a professor who says we're not going to discuss any such catastrophic rubbish as creation or Noah's flood. First week university course on geology. It's very evident that if you ask a question even concerning that, a friend of mine put his hand up in university at the end of the year doing a geology course, and he said, "But Professor, we haven't even discussed things like Noah's flood." And the professor said, "If you're going to ask stupid questions like that, take an arts course." So there is antagonism, and particularly the issue of 6 days is, well, they don't normally even get there, but if it does come up, it's regarded as a way with the fairies. It's regarded as an item of mockery usually, and you must be willing to have a pretty thick skin to actually get through it, as gracious as you can. Yes, you probably will lose it now and then because of the stupidity that's launched against you and the ignorance you find, but endure it to the end, because the Lord was there when he made it in 6 days, and he's there with you in the current conflict. Joe, finish off.
Yeah, it can be tough, but it's what you, in a sense, ought to expect. I've had the privilege of being raised in a Christian family, and my sort of story, getting involved with creation research, entwined with them. There are plenty of other people close to me who deal with me. University is, and just as John said, but also sometimes it can just be research in the UK is moving more into the public eye. I mean, back in 2008, 2009, 2010, that it really sort of exploded for you, John, traveling in the UK, and you sort of became a viral celebrity kind of figure, with all the atheists getting on board and so on and so forth. We're now sort of coming out of the pandemic, public eye, getting the centre established, so on. It's become extremely evident that people out there that don't like us, nor do they want us to exist, and they would quite like to do everything within their power to get rid of us. So it can be tough, but then that's what you should expect. I mean, even Jesus said persecution for my sake, and we often think of persecution as in the sense of, you know, being hunted down and killed, and that certainly is persecution, many other forms of persecution as well, and it can be tough sometimes, but you know you're at least on the right track and doing the right kind of thing. So we keep on pushing on, we go to the Lord, and ultimately it doesn't matter what other people think. As hard and as tough as it is, the most important thing is your relationship with Christ. The most important thing is that you're actually spreading the gospel, which is a commandment which God has given every single one of us. We're in full-time ministry or not. So a few thoughts for you there.
Okay. I think it's time to call it quits, Joe.
I think so. It sounds
Well, just one really quick thing, just on that thing about university. One thing that I found fascinating going to Bible college was the amount of teachers who were teaching about, Old Testament, theology, and exploring the Old Testament, things like that, believed in evolution and millions of years. I found that very fascinating in a Bible college.
It's a whole other issue, and I think we should do a whole program on that.
I think that's a good idea. We'll getting our whole list of programs all together, which is great. And all, God bless. Thank you for everybody who stayed on to the end. We've done nearly 2.5 hours, which is wonderful. Thank you. Yes, Sam, just jump through a few of the last quick thank yous.
Yeah, Stacey H, thank you. God bless you. 199 US Buckaroos. Thank you so much. And of course, it's not a creation research stream without a Doki Doki donation, 3 US Buckaroos. Baby Lemon with pom-poms in his hands, cheerleading. There you go. You even got a dance out of me, and it's nearly 11:30 at night. So there you go. That's a miracle in itself.
God bless.
Yes.
God bless everyone. We will see you
We'll leave
next
you.
time.
Good night.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Good night.